What is the creepiest glitch in the Matrix you've experienced? This happened back in college. I was driving home from my cabin in northern Wisconsin through the Indian reservation. There was a man on the side of the road sort of limping along, and I pulled over and asked if he was okay. He said yes, he was fine. He just needed to get home because his wife decided she still loved him. They'd had a fight. I asked the man where home was, and surprisingly it was the same city where I went to college, about 2 hours away. I offered him a ride. He didn't talk much. He was tired. When we got into town he started giving me directions. Just down here. It's close, he said. Take a left at the lights. Okay, I said. Right here, he said, pointing. After the white truck. Here. I pulled into the driveway. Yes. Shut up, I said. What? He asked. He was grinning, like he knew what I was going to say next. I used to live here, I told him. You don't say. Yes. Upstairs. Apartment number 3. Yeah. That's ours. Now he was smiling ear to ear. Small world, he said. He thanked me for the ride and got out of my car and walked through the front door of my old apartment building. I know it was just a coincidence, but it was one of the strangest moments of my life. I was heading home with my dad. We stopped at a drive-thru. I start feeling more and more anxious for no reason, to the point where it makes lightheaded and sick to my stomach. We have to wait a little bit ahead because they gave us the order wrong. So I sit there, feeling like shit, and it suddenly comes to me an urge to call my brother. He was trying to call us. He was in a car accident. No one died. Some got seriously bruised. He was only shaken. I told him to shut up and get as far away from the car as possible. He didn't understand but followed through, trying to call some of his buddies, and I could hear them calling him a wuss, him giving up and getting far, and then a loud noise, people shouting. After the whole S was over he told me what happened. His drunk friend tried to impress some girls in the car, hit the gas, drifted and hit the bottom of the car on some rocks, completely fucking with the engine. They stood near the car, the driver still inside trying to turn the engine back on. The hood burst in flames and the car started to burn fast. The driver managed to get away, but got severely hurt. Some of the guys and girls who stood around were hurt and burned too, but not as bad as the driver. My brother was the only one with light bruises from the whole thing. He told me that when I ordered him to get away from the car he was in front of it, inches from the hood. I never experienced anything like this before and after, just this once. It's just a freaking weird memory. I don't remember what I was thinking. I remember it like watching a movie and seeing myself and everything from an outside angle. Have a few, but this one stands out. I was catching a SkyTrain in one particular city about 15 minutes from where I get off. While I wait there is a woman with glazed eyes asking people for money. She came up to me, stopped briefly, and asked, "Excuse me, could you spare some money? My brother is in the hospital and I'd like some money to buy him some flowers." That's rich, I thought. Drug addicts are getting more and more obvious with their lines. Here's $5. Gave it to her without even looking her in the face, convinced of her intentions. Anyways, my train pulls up and I get on. I look through the glass at her walking around asking others for money as the train pulls away. The train arrives at the station 15 minutes later, and I walk down and out to the bus stop. There is only one bus the direction I'm going, and just my luck, it is there waiting when I get off the train. So on the bus I hop and wait for the bus driver to finish reading his paper before the doors close and we embark down the highway. About 5 to 10 minutes traveling, the driver pulls over for a routine stop. The doors open, and to my complete astonishment the woman from the SkyTrain walks into the bus, a dozen roses in hand. She looks me right in the eyes as she walks past to take her seat. How in the blue hell did she get there? I took the train before her. I watched her at the train stop from inside as we pulled away. I went over a river. I caught the first and only bus going this particular direction. And not only did she beat me there, she had time to go to a store and buy a dozen roses. To this day I have no idea how this happened. I used to live in North Carolina a few years ago and still regularly go back to visit friends. While I was there, my friends and I, who are now in college or are graduated, ran into somebody who we had known, although I didn't know her very well, back in high school. A few days later I flew back home to Texas. The next day I went to the grocery store and was walking down the aisle when I see a girl that looks exactly the same. I did the biggest double take I've ever done. Being 1400 miles away from the city where I knew the girl lived, it seemed absolutely impossible. As it turns out, after I called my friend about it, the girl I had been talking to in North Carolina has an identical twin in Texas who just happens to live in the same city as me for a couple hours. I thought I was crazy though. Back when I was in 5th grade, I remember sitting in class about to take an exam. It was one of those where the teacher would write down the question and we would all write the answer on our sheet. After about the 3rd question, I started to realize that I had already seen these questions in the same order and knew the answers. I honestly remember it being like Groundhog's Day, where I had this déjà vu moment, like I had already sat through the test the previous day. I raised my hand and said we had already done these questions, and I got this dumbfounded look from the teacher and classmates. I looked around like seriously I'm the only one realizing this? Oh really? Our teacher says, what's the next answer? I went up and wrote the next several answers that just came to my head. He looked down at his test, verified the board, then cancelled the test. Spent the rest of the afternoon with the teacher and principal being accused of compromising the test. The principal had him go through all his notes and lesson plans to see if he had briefed the test by accident in the past. They asked the other kids. Nobody else remembered. They all scored bad on the test. 10 years ago I was returning home from a road trip with 2 friends. I received a phone call from my parents asking when we would be arriving, and I explained that we were about 25 minutes away. About a minute later we came around a bend. It was a full moon and we could see the reflection from a lake below us, and other than that the road was completely empty. Suddenly everything went completely dark in the car, no lights from the dash or gauges or headlights on the road. The music also stopped and restarted at the beginning of the CD we were listening to. There was now a vehicle pulled over by the police about 1/4 mile in front of us that hadn't been there a split second before. I assumed I had dozed off for just a second as it was late. I thought it was still quite peculiar, though. After about a minute, the driver of the car tuned the music all the way down and said, "Did that just happen to anyone else?" The other passenger in the back seat sat forward abruptly and exclaimed, "I thought I just fell asleep." We then realized that the clock in the car was reading an hour later than it just had a minute before. To keep ourselves from freaking out we decided that the car had possibly had a momentary electrical failure and reset the clock to an odd time, turned off the dash lights, headlights, and gauges, and restarted the CD player. But when we arrived home 25 minutes later, we were 1 hour late. I'm missing an hour of my life, and to this day, have no idea how it happened. When I was a teenager I had 2 really intense dreams one night. The first one was about an online friend of mine calling me to say she'd broken up with her boyfriend, and I sang a few lines of Seal's Don't Cry to her over the phone. The second dream was finding a real-life friend dead body floating in her bathtub. I didn't think anything of it up until I logged online that evening and the online friend came online to tell me her boyfriend broke up with her. I immediately asked if I could call her and she said no. I remember thinking that it meant something, like I could change it. Not long after, my phone rang and it was real life friend from the dream calling me. I was completely freaked at this point, but talked to her normally. She was just talking about school and up until I realized I heard a splash in the background. I asked her, "Are you in the tub?" And when she said yes I felt like my heart had stopped. I asked her, "What did you do?" She didn't answer me right away, and then after a very long pause she told me she'd taken an entire bottle of pills and chased it with mushrooms and vodka. She'd gotten scared waiting for it to hit her, so she called me so she'd hear someone's voice. I hung up and called 911. By the time they got there she was unconscious, but alive. Today she's a mom to a beautiful little girl, and she's okay. Oh, I have a story. One time my wife and I were coming back from a dinner night out. When I opened the door of the house, she was sitting at the computer working, as I usually find her when I get home. Nothing unusual, except she was entering the house with me. I shrugged it off and carried on. We went to bed and I told her that I saw her sitting at the computer, and she goes dead serious and told me that when I opened the door, she saw herself sitting at the computer working. Creepiest thing I've ever experienced. The fact that our neighbor's 2 years old daughter used to point to the TV when it was off and tell us that the person on the screen was making scary faces and that she wanted it to go away didn't help us getting much sleep that night. Not creepy, but so vivid and distinct that I still think about it years later. I had a subjectively long, involved dream where I was a vendor in a fish market. I remember getting up early, dressing, doing a whole morning routine, going to get tea, heading out to the docks, buying fish, loading them in a cart, and going to get ice, then haggling for ice, buying some less fresh fish while I was at it, then going to a market to my stall, setting up and selling fish all day. It was so real. I talked to friends, smoked nasty cigarettes, haggled customers, ate lunch, had tea and just lived through the day. At the end of the day, I cleaned up, counted my cash, paid the stall rent, went home, cooked some of the fish I hadn't sold, sling with some veggies and rice that I'd traded for. I drank more tea, relaxed for a while, then drew a hot bath, soaked and smoked some more cigs, then went to bed. The next morning, I woke up refreshed, ready to go down to the docks to buy fresh catch, except I was in my house, next to my wife, truck parked outside, and it was Saturday, no work. My wife and I were getting geared up to go skiing in Oregon and the car was already packed. Weird thing was, in the dream, I was single and a smoker. I'm not. And the whole long dream had been in fluent Chinese. The effortless kind of fluency that only comes from a lifetime of speaking it. Oh, and I had been Chinese. I'm a big hairy white dude, somewhat fluent in Spanish, and I know a little bit of Russian, but it was just weird. I've never worked in a fish market. I wonder who I was. I wonder what that was.